Excellent. Good afternoon and welcome to our virtual roundtable today, Reimagining Staff Training. This is week 12 of our virtual roundtable series from ACUHO-I, so we're so glad you're joining us again. Before I get started, we do want to acknowledge the recent incidents of racialized violence and extend our ongoing support to the Black community members. Please know that ACUHO-I is going to be continuing our efforts to support and educate membership on these issues, and that includes a program next week on allyship that we'll be putting on in a roundtable setup. Our association is also putting out a call for volunteers to engage on a task force that will be dedicated to how housing professionals can contribute to the dismantling of systemic oppression on our campuses and beyond. So please, this is a topic and a subject that's near and dear to ACUHO-I's heart. We're going to continue to be putting forth resources and opportunities for our members to engage on this. As we look at other resources that ACUHO-I is continuing to put out, COVID-19 response has been chief among them. And as you can see with our online community threads, our YouTube recordings of virtual roundtables, and our dedicated page to COVID-19 resources, we're continuing to churn out those resources for you on your college campuses as you're continuing to now plan for what the next academic year looks like. Certainly when we put out this topic for reimagining staff training, our registration numbers were outstanding. This is clearly a topic that is a need area and a want area for you as members, and we're going to be talking about that today. These topics you see from the past, whether they're threads on our online community or our YouTube recordings, your membership dollars as being ACUHO-I members, whether that's individual or institutional, help to really fund those opportunities for us to give you resources. So we sincerely appreciate your support as members of ACUHO-I, and we hope you'll continue partnering with us in that. I am joined by, yet again, another outstanding panel of professionals in the field that are going to be talking to you about staff training approaches on their campuses. But first, let's talk about our session today. As always, it's a virtual roundtable. We want it to be a conversation. You're going to see a total of 5 slides today on our PowerPoint. Really, this is a chance for you to engage, use the Q&A function, use the chat function, and connect with us. We do want you to look to submit questions that you have on this topic through our Q&A button. So on your Zoom menu, you'll see a Q&A button. Great opportunity as you're thinking, hey, that's a topic I want us to touch on today. Please put that in there. You are able to see all the questions that are submitted by attendees. You're able to upvote a topic. If you see a question there, you're like, I want to see that answered, please upvote that. That will show us that's a topic we really need to make sure we get to in our session today. We know an hour moves very quickly in these virtual roundtables. And of course, you also have the chat function. Another function that you have on your Zoom menu is the raised hand function. So right now you should be seeing a slide deck. You should be seeing webcam presences of our panel. If you can see, hear, be connected to us, if you could just hit that raised hand function, show us that everything's working on your end. A tech check is always helpful this early on in a session. So thank you for your attentiveness. Really appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and lower hands. Please be mindful of the raise hand function. I look for that as your moderator today. I'm looking for people who raise their hands that, oh, you may have a question or you may have something to add on that topic, and you may be called on, just like 5th grade. So if you raise your hand, be mindful of the outcomes of that. So we'd love to connect with you. If that's a method of connecting, that's great. So use that raised hand function if you've got something to add as well. So that is enough about our session. We are running 100%. I want to get to our panelists and really take the time today. We've got 54 minutes of talking about reimagining staff training. I'm going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves and just talk a little bit about their staff training approach on their campuses. So Kendra, let's start with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kendra Skinner. I'm the Director of Residence Life here at Southeast Missouri State University. And I've also had the pleasure of serving on ACUHO-I's Future of Housing work group and leading the staffing and human resources kind of subgroup from that group. And staff training was definitely a topic that we talked quite a bit about, in addition to lots of other needs from staffing needs and just support for all of our staff members, whether that's our student staff members to our graduate assistants and our professional staff members as well. Here at Southeast, we have actually been fortunate that we have done a little bit of online training for about 10 years and have done that in the summer. And so I know there's many schools that are out there that are trying to figure out what could this online remote training look like for your institution. And so hopefully we can provide a little bit of information related to that. But we still have lots of questions, just like the rest of you, about how we're going to do training face-to-face in the fall and what that will look like, what we need to worry about, as we're bringing our staff together, how we do staff development with them, how we're going to bring our speakers in. So we may have just as many questions as you do, and hopefully we'll answer some of those today, but we could bring up even more for you as well. But we're excited about looking towards the future and what changes we can make with our own program as well. So I'm looking forward to talking with these panelists and hearing a little bit about what they've got going on for this next fall as well.
Thanks, Kendra. Let's hear next from Ashley.
Hey everybody, Ashley Boltushek, any and all pronouns, and I am the Senior Associate Director of Residence Life at American University in DC. Part of my main role is actually to work directly within our care network, so supporting students who are facing low to high level concerns that are living in the residence halls, and I do a lot of crossover with the Dean of Students Office. I think one of the things that I'm really excited about for training this year and reimagining what we do next is I think it's really forcing all of us to focus more on our student staff and how we think about wellness for them, both from how they're going to engage potentially virtually up through how we then continue to provide that support and those resources throughout their entire time with us. So I'm looking forward to joining in with this conversation with you all.
Thanks, Ashley. Renee.
Hi, I'm Renee Piquette-Dowdy. I'm the Assistant Director of Staffing and Training in the Office of Residence Life at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And in my role, I work with a variety of levels and layers of staffing and training, and I get the opportunity to guide a really outstanding training team that works together to help to coordinate all of these pieces. And over the years, we've been fortunate to have been thinking about how we do our training differently, and what ways do we have training content that crosses over multiple areas. We had shifted some things to online training, which has been a saving grace for us right now as well, in terms of preparation for that, as well as some things that we've learned along the way that I'd love to share in terms of what has gone well with our student staff and what failed marvelously that gave us great lessons to learn, as well as I look forward to sharing some tangible resources of things that are working effectively for our department that you may want to consider as well, some at a cost and some at low to no cost to be able to think about as well. So thanks for having me join you, and I'm excited to learn from your questions as well of what are the other things that we're not thinking about that we should all have on our radars, and it's really wonderful to have the chance to share in that with all of you today.
Thanks, Renee. That's great. And I already see questions coming in on the Q&A, which I love, and I see people upvoting some of those comments. So I already have active participants as we're moving forward. Next, we're going to hear from Kara.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is so great to be in this space with you to learn and to enhance our training practices. A few things that are guiding our work at the University of South Florida, Tampa, is the fact that in order for training to be effective, we know that it needs to reflect the current needs of our students. So just like this year, it's a no-brainer or a non-negotiable to talk about the implications of COVID-19 on our processes and protocols for supporting students. We also know that it needs to be a non-negotiable to facilitate anti-racist education this year and every year forward. And we need to think about how we're amplifying the voices of the Black and Brown community. So who are we deeming the experts about specific subjects? I want to take a moment just to thank Dylan Wilkes and Beverly Mattil for their continued commitment to creating learning-centered environments that build strong teams. I am confident that they will be our bosses one day. In my role as an assistant director of residential education who oversees training, we have developed a fierce commitment to using adult learning theory to inform our training practices. And when we move into a virtual space this fall, that doesn't mean we need to throw that work out the window. virtual training does not mean that we need to revert back to just information dumping and information sharing. There are ways to create engaging learning spaces online where people not only learn the information and knowledge, but also develop the skills they need to facilitate student success. And so I'm happy to chat with folks about that and learn about how they're doing that, because it's important in order for people to thrive in their roles.
Thank you, Carol. And Liz.
Hi, everybody. My name is Liz Gordon-Canlis. I'm the Director of Residence, Life, and Housing at Columbus College of Art and Design, which is in downtown Columbus, Ohio. And for our training approach for this year, we historically have been an institution where we have a small team, and so it's allowed us to do quite a bit of hands-on opportunities that maybe weren't accessible at some of the previous institutions where I worked because of the size of the staff there. And so that's really causing us to have to do some big shifts. This year, we normally do a multi-day overnight for a big part of our student leadership training, and that's not available. And of course, just like Kara spoke to, we are in the heart of demonstrations and active protests and critical questions that are happening in our city, and our student staff, for the most part, who are already on campus, because many of them stay with us over the summer, are witnessing that and are going to be carrying that on their hearts and minds well into the academic year. And so wanting to ensure that we've talked about how that really directly intertwines with the training work that we do. But we are not an institution, especially as a design and an art school. And I know some of my colleagues out there in that world know that the shift to online or remote learning presents a different challenge for our student body and for our campus setting. And so we're working through that. And luckily, having ACUHO-I as a next door neighbor here in Columbus has offered some incredible resources that we're going to use. But I'm also eager to learn for everyone else who's here about what we're going to do to respond in August.
Thanks, Liz. And again, when we take a topic such as reimagining staff training, that's broad. So we could be spending time today talking about professional staff training, student staff training, specific topics that we may be touching on during a staff training, virtual, in person, what that looks like. So very broad scope today. So really looking forward to the questions. Obviously, I see a couple, and I see that Paul submitted a question that already has 36 upvotes. So that tells me, boy, we're going to get to that question right away. I would be remiss if I didn't briefly touch on 5 of the online learning opportunities that ACUHO-I provides when it comes to staff training over the summer. ACUHO-I has an RA 101 course, which is individualized remote learning that can be done with RAs on your staff. We are about to publish RA 201, which is the next level, the next step that can be done in that online individualized training program. That can be added on top of RA 101, or it can be taken the following year if a returning staff member has already taken 101. We have the Developing RA Training online course for those of you who may be on your campus and this is your first time developing a training program and you would like to hear from some insights from some experts in the field. And then we also, if you're looking for supplements for your professional staff training, we have an RA Supervision course, which is honestly outstanding. Our RA Supervision course, a great option if you are looking to provide some additional training for incoming new staff or staff that are new to supervising. And then we have a Hall Director Supervision course, which is a great opportunity for mid-level managers to maybe their first time supervising full-time staff, what that looks like and how they can learn from that online course. So a few online virtual components that ACUHO-I does offer on our online education wing. That being said, let's dive into some questions. And you can always chat me up if you want to hear more about those online opportunities. So Paul asks, and our number one top voted question so far, how do folks envision doing their incident role play for their entire new staff while still practicing social distancing? So low number groups, masks, 6 feet minimum distance. We know this is crucial in their ability to address incidents, and incidents are not going to occur in a controlled manner, but we want to balance that with protecting them. So thoughts on, many schools might call this a behind closed doors activity. What are some of our thoughts from the panel?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question. And I think it's something that we've all been really thinking about really closely in terms of how do we sort of achieve that same level of experience. And I think the first thing that we have to acknowledge is we're not going to. And so I think we have this really interesting opportunity that we are re-envisioning sort of what training looks like and how our students are experiencing the things that we need them to walk away with knowing and feeling hopefully a bit more comfortable in before they really go into enacting their roles. Some of the things we're anticipating trying to do, because at American, we're operating off of the assumption that we will not be in person. Everything will be coming to you through the screen all of the time. And so one of the goals is to actually create breakout rooms using Zoom or another platform where our community directors or our returning staff who were shoulder tapping as actors would actually sort of get into other spaces. They would be in dialogue, in discussion, sort of role playing, and having a group of staff that are responding to that call. We also have been really thinking about the opportunity of having our professional staff physically distanced and still being able to act out some of those more traditional behind closed doors scenarios that we've seen over the years. And so working with a mix of those applications, with the main goal being that at the end of whatever that looks like, we would have very small breakout groups for our students, staff, and our professional staff to reflect and really drive home some of the points of those different issues that they might be addressing.
For Marquette, we are gearing up for plans to be in person in the fall. We're kind of full steam ahead with that goal in mind. And so for our training committee, we really identified that being able to practice those adjustments to protocols in person are going to be especially crucial to be able to facilitate that safely to help solidify their learning. And so a couple methods that we're approaching with this is that one, during hall director training, the hall directors will be recording how to go about approaching those. So they're also solidifying their learning in those changes in protocol. 60% of our RAs are returning staff, which means that we'll have a lot of unlearning to need to do with them in terms of how they are used to or accustomed to going into spaces. So what we're working on right now is that typically our behind closed doors would have been really all of our RAs gathered within a large residence hall, sort of circulating all throughout the buildings. And so we are shifting it all to being in hall with our subject matter experts, also having a recording that the hall directors can play for them on those topics where that may relate, whether that's pertaining to alcohol and other drugs, things along those lines, and then really reducing, looking at large residential spaces we can use within each building to facilitate that so everyone can observe while physically distanced, to be able to practice that. So for us, really, the practice remains key. In addition, we're really looking at kind of a better flipped classroom model in terms of behind closed doors, where the RAs will be doing some pre-work in advance of viewing those videos recorded by the hall directors ahead of time of how to approach them correctly. And that, in terms of training and development, regardless of if you're moving to online training or not, is really crucial that people see how it is done right and correctly, because that will stay with them and stick with them. So it's great that they'll have a chance to be able to perhaps experiment with, I can practice this in a safe place to be able to get feedback, but they need to be able to see examples of how that's done correctly first. And so it struck us that it would be ideal to roll that out during hall director training, record those sessions, have them then available for our staff. So that's kind of our modified behind closed doors.
Thanks all, great answers to that. And of course, our question thread is open to all. So as you have approaches at your institutions you're willing to share, please put that on that answer thread for that topic. But certainly an important piece to continue having in our staff trainings. Our next topic is submitted by Josh S. From Carnegie Mellon. What resources and delivery methods are folks using to facilitate anti-racism training for student staff in the virtual space? And this has been upvoted by many of you in attendance, so certainly a salient topic.
At the University of South Florida, Tampa, social justice education is one of our non-negotiables. And I think that it can be easy to say that that's not a that is an optional session or not as important as federally mandated training like Title IX or duty in crisis. And what we need to recognize and debunk a myth about is that that's simply not true. And so we are going to continue to meet people where they're at, which feels like a hokey phrase, but nevertheless, we separate our new and returning resident assistants because we know their skill sets and their knowledge base is different. And with our new staff, it is an introduction and the beginning of a conversation where they start to explore themselves and start to explore their biases and how their biases might show up in their role as a resident assistant throughout intentional conversations and responding to crisis situations and noticing trends in their communities, so on and so forth. With our returning staff, our student staff, we take a deeper dive into issues of systemic racism and are hoping to create some affinity groups for allies and then those who are directly feeling the impacts of what's going on in our world so that people have a space to process and be together, even virtually, for the first time in months.
There's something that we're approaching, and I'll put some information about this in the chat that was just a conversation that I had with some of our training committee members today. It's a platform called ARIST, A-R-I-S-T, and I'll put that into the chat. Basically, I'll share with you two things. So one is we're getting ready to roll out 30 days in advance of training. All of our RAs will be enrolled in this particular platform. And what it does is basically it texts to your enrolled students into the course content that you'd like to share with them daily. So initially, I became familiar with this platform because of wanting to provide some ongoing training, in particular in regards to approaching acute intoxication, where we want to send a reminder in advance of, say, a high-risk drinking weekend. Remember, these are the 4 signs that you should be looking for in terms of acute intoxication, as an example. In light of all that's been happening and reflecting, it occurred to me that we could use this platform to do some advanced training before students arrive to campus, where basically we are working on creating for them an anti-racism platform that the RAs will be participating in that will give them daily questions and reflections that are brief, but meant to continue to keep them thinking about this work leading up to getting into the space together. So that way we have some pre-work that is accomplished. And again, it isn't long sessions. You're not thinking about big modules. You're talking about micro-sized learning of like, this is a brief reflection to think about today. And it's keeping this front of mind for them as they're getting ready to get to that space. So that right now has been the newest thing that we are pivoting to doing. ARIST is free for educators, which is really exciting. So there isn't a limit to how many people you can get onto those modules. So I found that to be really appealing, and I thought you all may be interested in that too. So I'll place into the chat information about that particular platform, as well as there is a Practicing Anti-Racism 101 that's available that is geared to folks who are white in particular, in terms of doing the work and what that looks like. And so it does have a small fee of $6, but that fee all goes to Black Lives Matter and to other anti-racism groups. So I'll share that, and if you want to give that a look, that might be of interest to you.
Thanks for sharing, and also thank you in advance for sharing that resource in the chat. I think a topic we need to jump into, and we're seeing a number of questions come up on this, is it's pretty broad. It's virtual versus in-person, and it is virtual session fatigue. What are some of the approaches and thoughts out there? I think we've got a question from Jim in terms of the thought of having virtual training live versus it being pre-recorded, which I think is a great topic. I mean, similar to this roundtable day, we host it live, we do record it, but sometimes it can be more engaging live than it may be if you're just watching a recording. If you're watching this recording, we're so glad you're watching it, by the way. caveat. And then we also have a question about Zoom fatigue with large groups. So just bringing that whole virtual education component to the panel.
So I guess I'll start off and share just a little bit about kind of what we've been doing here. So for the past 10 years, we've been doing summer training with staff, and that's been online at your own pace that we developed. And we started using a number of different platforms when we first kind of created it to put it together. But then moved it to our learning management system here on campus, which is currently Moodle. But could obviously be put anywhere else: Canvas, Blackboard, whatever your campus learning management system is. So that we really allow the students to be able to work at that at their own pace. Here's a time when you need to have it completed by. So it's it's been a combination of PowerPoints, or articles that we've asked them to read and to respond to. So we really set it up very similarly to a class, which is why we thought the learning management system was the best route to go for us, so that they could really kind of look at this as a class. And we really took that opportunity to really use sessions that we'd already created for face-to-face, and to put those into that summer online training option there. So it really provides that basis, that good foundation. And we noticed it right away when we started to implement this. Was the student staff came in with so much knowledge and understanding already that we knew we could start 2 steps further ahead. And it meant that we only needed to do 1 week of training face-to-face in August. Obviously now, we're grateful that we have that because we know that we've got that initial opportunity for staff to get some of that training. But as we start to think about what this is going to look like in the fall, we know we can't just do, here's a PowerPoint, go out and read it. I think we've already started to talk a little bit about, how do we make some of this happen? Do you have a staff team that's small enough that you could have them all in one space, social distanced, that you're then showing your presentations by presenters who are Zooming, live into you. I think there's some schools that are talking about splitting up their staff teams into smaller teams, so your family unit is in one place together, and being able to train together and to talk through some different things while some presentations are happening. Obviously, the biggest thing that we definitely have to think about, we already spend too many hours in training anyway. We ask our staff to sit in there for 8-10 hours, and we can't do that virtually. We absolutely cannot. And we need to recognize that our staff have so many different learning styles that we need to be able to take that into consideration, whether that's scheduling more breaks or just kind of changing things up. So not having, okay, we're going to sit in front of this presentation again for another hour. Here's somebody new that's coming at you on a tiny screen. We definitely need to take a look at that and just be very mindful of what that looks like for our staff members. So because that retention of information is going to be so key for everyone. But I think the biggest thing for us at this point is take what you already have, don't scrap it all, take what you have, and you can begin to put a good foundation with some of the things together. So for some of you who don't have any online opportunities yet that you've created, don't think, oh my gosh, we're never going to get this done. Our faculty colleagues were able to turn courses around very quickly to remote opportunities for students, and we can do the same thing. And so I know we can make strong, robust training, and just don't be afraid to try some different things, but to know, even letting our students know that this is the first time we're having to do this, not face-to-face, and we need to make some things look a little bit differently for people. And so getting their feedback, I think, will be very important as we're creating some of this, and then afterwards, as we're assessing it, of course, to ensure that it met the needs of our students.
I think we also have to debunk a myth, which is screen fatigue is actually different from Zoom fatigue. And Zoom fatigue is far more intense than screen fatigue. And it comes from the fact that you can constantly stare at yourself and see what you look like, which I'm doing right now as I'm speaking, and I know we've all done it. It comes from the fact that there is no feedback in a training session that should feel like we can read a room, but you just can't. And so if they're staring, and they can't pause it. So we've really thought about what we can do as on-demand or asynchronous learning, which is the information dumping. And then the sessions that need to be live are those that share a little bit of information and then have breakout rooms to do some role playing and some skill building and some improv, so that people aren't in live training sessions all day or even half the day.
Great approaches, certainly. Thank you for sharing those. And that's going to be one of those topics we're going to continue to develop as a field as we get closer and closer to what fall looks like. The Res Lifer in me certainly loves this next question. It's from Katie Bartel from University of Victoria in British Columbia. What are some ideas to facilitate team building and celebration recognition components of training that feel meaningful but are done at a physical distance or online?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about this for our student staff training at CCAD, especially, like I said, because we've had such an intensive team bonding centric theme to our training over the years. And so we reached out to the summer camp, who we were all set to return to and participate with. And some of those folks who do some amazing kind of outdoor education have also really shifted some of those resources to some online facilitation. And I was really not sure, like, what does this look like? You're gonna put your low ropes course on the internet. We're gonna take our s'mores onto a Zoom room. I don't know. So we did a demo last week, and I was able to really see how this could be one of those layered opportunities where you do some of that. You know, we've set up our RA training through like our student learning management system, so that information is there, they can review it. And then you do other elements of training by having this new voice, this new face, this external facilitator who's able to bring our staff through some team building. And it's not really just about the team building component. It's more so about the layered approach to, like, what are you actually asking your staff members to do when they do an incident report, right? You're asking them to make observations. You're asking them to have attention to detail. You're reminding them that there are things that they easily miss. And you can really get at that type of learning through many different elements, right? You don't necessarily have to just have them do a behind closed doors exercise. So that just reminded me that, you know, depending on, you know, the budget and time that folks have available, that, you know, some of the other partners who we've always worked with for training have gotten really creative. And, you know, I know one of the other things that we've normally done as a small college is we've connected a lot through our RA training with the other small colleges in Central Ohio. And, you know, we're not going to be able to do that this year. But again, what was the big takeaway from that? It was learning about another type of community and learning how we can build our communities in all different ways. And so we're thinking of some ways about how can we kind of create something that can go out to all of our student leaders that reflects, you know, what it means to create community on our different campuses, and how can they do some of that kind of trading of learning that we've always done by doing service work together with another college, you know, in Columbus, or how can we help our RAs learn about, you know, what it means to get involved in the city of Columbus if we can't take them to some of the sites we've taken them to before. So I say all that to say, like, there are opportunities out there, right? Like, I'm not so negative or pessimistic anymore that RA training is going to be nothing but like a Zoom fest, or we're not going to be able to have any of the elements that we had before. It's going to be different, but it doesn't have to be, I think, as dry as we're thinking it's going to be.
I think one other thing that we have to keep in mind is that, you know, depending on what the guidelines are at that point, we could have opportunities to bring some of our small groups together. So this is a great opportunity for staff mix-ups. So if you want to pull different people from different staffs to get them to know one another and do, you know, some small different things, whether that's, you know, some kind of, maybe going out to eat might not be a good idea, potentially, depending on where you are. But you could also, you know, look at something, you know, creating your own meals in a small staff team and doing some things like that. So I want to be cautious, you know, to think that, you know, we still have opportunities, I think, to bring some small groups together to do different things. And it's just, we can't do some of those large, maybe spirit building opportunities that we've had in the past. And we just need to think a little bit more creatively about bringing smaller groups together. And that could be, you know, more intimate connections that people are making with other people on their own team, but then across teams, you know, across campus and from other areas. So don't be afraid to bring those smaller groups together as well, so that that we have some of that team building that's happening across the department.
I think connection is more important now than ever, and we can't let a screen get in the way of that. So if you think about all of the graduate school cohorts that are now reuniting 10, 20 years later, that same shared experience of sharing who we are and what's going on in our world doesn't have to stop because we're not physically in the same room together. And an example of something we're doing, we used to do a lip sync with our student staff, and now we're doing TikTok challenges. So that's a really tangible initiative that you can implement on your campuses. I think with our professional and graduate staff, we've been focusing a lot on student staff. Building that team or rebuilding that team is really important. A lot of us aren't bringing on new staff, but they've been apart for 3 months and working in isolation. And so we are committed to bringing it back to us and recommitting to each other and reminding each other that we belong together by having opportunities to share about an item of significance, or revisiting our strengths and learning about ourselves again, and also sharing how we show up in the workplace through our strengths and our identities.
Thanks for those great ideas, folks. Another themed thread I've been seeing coming through in the questions and answers, we kind of think about the timeline for training is, if online training is being offered, when is it happening? If it's happening during the summer, how is that impacting if your student staff is under contract? I would have to guess many of them are not. What does that look like? How is summer training able to happen if it's virtual and pre-arrival to campus?
So for us, our training is actually going to start in line with when our students essentially would have arrived. So we're keeping the same days that they had already anticipated being in person to train, except that we'll be virtual. And we're doing our best to actually keep our student staff likely from returning right up until we have students who are coming in, because we want to maintain that social distance, and that physical space just isn't necessarily it may not be as accessible. And so we really want to give as much time to our entire university to make really good decisions around what we're going to do and what the recommendations and requirements are around that physical distancing, so that when they arrive, we're hopefully able to have a very clear and concise idea of how we can do exactly what was brought up in the last question. How do we take what we've spent time doing with them over the past 5, 6, 7 days remotely and bring that in person in some way? One thing I will mention is we have, while the days are essentially the same for our training, we've drastically cut down the number of hours. So we're anticipating sort of half days with any range of 3 to 5 hours of material a day, broken up in some variety, whether that's a pre-designated module or that's sort of a live stream where we are breaking staff out into subgroups, or having them participate like in an annotated screen, or using some other tools to have them engage in the moment.
We're similar in a lot of ways. Outside of the texting module I mentioned earlier is really the only piece that we are sending out to them in advance. So our other online training is actually all placed within their schedule. So we designate time set aside for them to fully complete it, which also helps so that way the hall directors know that that's what's going on at that point in time, and they can provide tech support if needed, or the RAs know that their hall director is available to be able to talk about that, because we've built in the online training as part of the sequencing of the training experience. So that way, if they are, say, working on modules focused on policy, that's going to be leading up to being able to do some very thoughtful practice and physically distanced policy practice, such as behind closed doors. Or if they are engaging in, so for example, we're going to be live streaming our suicide prevention and response training with our counseling center. So that's an example of where we know that's going to be live streamed. We have another staff member who's going to be fielding questions from staff, what that will look like, because consistently we want that to happen at that point in time, because we know it's a sensitive and difficult topic. And so we want to be able to provide staff support surrounding that. And I'd encourage you to build it into your staff training schedule so you know how long it's going to take them to complete it. And it's also ideal that, this may sound fairly obvious, but as we started doing online training with our staff before this, I think have begun to incorporate this. Make sure that your other levels of staff are participating in that training so they know what their supervisees are encountering. Again, that sounds super obvious, but you're going to want to build time in hall director training for your hall directors to be familiar with these modules so that way they can provide accurate support and troubleshooting. So that's just something to consider and think about too. The recent thing that's been on my mind is making sure that every one of our halls is equipped in terms of tech to be able to stream some of this. Some of our buildings are better than others and having the adequate streaming capabilities. And so we're doing some practice run-throughs. We have backup spaces available to be able to use. And for us, we're in kind of a unique situation where our academic calendar was actually moved up. So our students are coming back earlier. And we also have the DNC happening in Milwaukee still, where folks are going to be housed on our campus during that point in time. So RA training is actually happening a week earlier than what we anticipated. So we have some unique things happening there. But then what we discovered is that we'll have a week where RAs really have a tremendous amount of free time on their hands. And so how are we really providing time and space for them to be doing some of the work that they can do individually, and being so thoughtful about what's happening together, but we're mapping all of that out for them so they know what's expected of them. They know what those schedules are going to look like, and the hall directors are prepared because they're going to be on the front lines of providing that support, that they're going to feel equipped to be able to help to support them in that.
And I guess I'll just say for our student staff that that are doing the training in the summer, so our institution views the RAs as a leadership position and not an employment. And so I know there's questions about compensation and how we get people to do this. And when we created this 10 years ago, we actually talked with the staff about it, prior to implementing it, and indicated to them that, we could bring you back earlier and have what would potentially be 2 to 2.5 weeks of training, or we could allow you to remain home where you're working and still gaining some money for the school year. And at that point our staff had indicated that they would prefer to do this in the summer and not have to come back early to be here on campus. And so there might be some differences obviously with institutions. If you're viewing your RAs and your student staff as employees, a summer online training may not be an option for you, but for those of you who are viewing them as leadership opportunities, for us this is skill development to help you prepare to do your position, and that's really helped us to be able to allow the students to manage that. And as I said, it's self-paced, so it's not something that they are having to do within one day or a week, so that they really can work it around their schedule. And then for those students who are abroad, we've even put it on CDs if they don't have internet access, to make sure that we're being accessible to all of the staff for the next school year.
Great, thanks all. I have two logistical topics when it comes to training that I want to bring up for good of the order. And they are dining and quarantine. What a great combination. So first, let's talk about dining. And if you've not gotten this far in your staff training plans, totally understandable. We'll kind of go rapid fire with the panel. But do you have a plan for feeding students that are in training on your campuses in in-person training? And if so, what does that plan look like?
So this might apply also both to the quarantine question, or perhaps, or at least spirit of it. And that is, I received some really great guidance from Dr. Vicka Bell Robinson, who's Director of Residence Life at Miami University, unrelated to dining and unrelated to quarantine. But what it reminded me of is, perhaps it's wise, for me and for some of us to kind of go back to where we were the days before we potentially sent our students, off to do their remote and distant learning. And how were we making decisions then? We were making decisions based off of perhaps the recommendations of the CDC, for me, the Ohio Department of Health, and the governor of Ohio. And so in August, we should make decisions based off of those same things. So if the recommendation around dining is being dictated by your state Department of Health or your governor, then that's how we will be feeding individuals. Perhaps that might mean a carry-out meal. It might mean that we set tables, socially distant. But my mindset for training continues to be that I am not an epidemiologist. I am not a healthcare provider. And so I take the recommendations of those individuals. And, that may not be the way that we want it to be. And I sometimes do feel encouraged to think like, well, how could we get a little bit more creative here? And perhaps we could find a way and make it happen. And, it's also okay to in some of these areas to not find a way and to not make it, to just do the way that it needs to be done that's being recommended by, our state, healthcare providers. And that's the same for quarantine. So there is no longer a recommendation or a mandate in the state of Ohio for folks to quarantine for 14 days if they have traveled in and out of the state of Ohio. That was in practice over much of our semester. And so it was something that we were very mindful of if we had students who needed to return to get belongings. And so that mandate has currently been lifted. For students who are traveling, in and out of the country, that's going to look really different depending on, their own home country. And again, the guidance of that and the oversight of that doesn't have to be something, that we do. I think we have to be aware of it so that we can utilize that in our decision making. But, that's the kind of the place to start. And so that's the one thing I've been keeping in mind for those logistic questions. Those are challenging, right? And those are regardless of the pandemic. When I've worked with RA communities of upwards of 400, 500 RAs, feeding all of those people over the span of 2 weeks, it's something else. It's not an easy task. So I know that that's a special challenge in this time, but that's how I'm utilizing some of my decision making.
I will say, many of your dining service providers may already be developing plans. I know that ours is here on my campus and has already shared what certain things will look like depending on where we are. So that's already given me an understanding of, whether we are going to need to do to-go or box meals that might be provided, or if we might have opportunities for people to go in and be served with to-go meals. So don't hesitate to reach out to your dining service providers and getting connected with them now just to find out what options might be available as you're planning your schedules. Because if you're going to need to take everybody in through this line, but what you would normally do in an hour, you're now going to need to do basically in 3, you're definitely going to need to come up with some other options. So dining is definitely one, that we want to make sure people get fed. So we're going to need to figure out kind of how to do that and make sure that it's, doesn't get too boring for them as well.
Thanks. Great approaches there. And Elizabeth, I think you really touched on the quarantine question really well. I think you've really got to look to the guidance of your state and local area. And a lot of head nods for the panel. That tells me we're going to go to another rapid fire question that one of our last ones we'll cover. And this is, again, one of those feeler questions. But when we take a look at online training and our staffs in the future, what do you think are some good ways or ways that you're planning to continue to increase morale on staffs while there may be an online component to what you're doing? So just ways to increase staff morale moving forward or in a training component.
I think that, oh, sorry, Ashley, if you want to.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Renee.
I do think we have to be careful not to overthink how much we're manufacturing some of it. I do think it's important to be intentional and to consider how we build teams, but also to know how many of us have developed trust and learned so much about the people who we work with because we've been through a crisis together. And not that any of us would welcome a collective crisis like this or to the scale to build a team, but this is going to be an unforgettable experience for our student staff. And I think to know that that's a part that's going to be there. And probably the most important thing that you're doing then is helping to prepare your hall directors who are going to be on the front lines of facilitating the conversations that are happening 6 feet distance in the hallway, or that students are going to be coming to them with we're anticipating some really serious impacts on mental health. I think as Ashley well prepared us in thinking about and considering. And that, not that that is about the morale or the team building elements, but I think that being present with each other and preparing hall staff for how we're going to really use and amplify the skill sets that we already have to this situation that we're in is really going to be what a lot of this looks like for us. And so I think that in terms of morale, I think right now if you're feeling concerned about the RA's experiences with online learning, some of the things that we've done as well is that we've shoulder tapped RAs to test things out for us, to go, hey, would you take a look at this video before we put this as part of our module and give us your feedback? Things along those lines are morale boosters that help them to be able to get on board. One of my calls tomorrow is with a group of RAs who want to be able to talk about exactly that, of like, they have ideas and they want to run with some things that they think would be cool. And I think that also speaks to some of the team building things, is that some of our RAs are going to come up with things that we never dreamt of. And how do you just give some space for that this is their training too, and how are they an author in that experience, and just being able to bring their voices to the table on that, and not feeling pressure that we have to anticipate every piece of it. Some of it we're just going to have to be really agile in and recognize that this unique circumstance is going to bring with us some unique unintended benefits alongside the consequences that I think that we know we can prepare for.
Yeah, I think everything that Renee just shared, I'd like to echo. And in addition, I think, morale, I'm thinking about it in two ways, right? It's the, how do I feel about the people that I'm sitting in a staff meeting with in November, and how does my experience in training sort of contribute to that progress? But then also, how do I feel as a staff member sitting, looking at the rest of my team through a screen and looking at potentially very different levels of engagement? And I think what's going to be really important is to help our student staff and our professional staff understand and remember that engagement looks very different virtually. We don't have the same benefit of nonverbals and of a lot of the typical cues that we would receive as people that, even if you don't know what it means, you're like, ooh, that's something I should definitely ask Kara about that. That felt a little different. We sort of miss some of that. And so I think the more that we can find ways to have our staff engage with the direct conversation, so doing a hand check, like on a scale of 1 to 10, and asking them to put their hands up, because this also means that their phones are now down, potentially, if they won't be looking at their phones their whole time, right? So, doing checks of, let's get some ratings of how people are feeling, and really using the practice that I think Spencer really mentioned early on, like, I don't want to feel like I'm in 5th grade again, but if I'm sitting in front of a small group of 13 people, that I'm using some intention and I'm really paying attention to who am I hearing from and who am I not hearing from. And so saying, posing a question and saying, okay, I'd really love to hear from Liz, Kara, and then Kendra on the following, right? So keeping them on their toes just a little bit, because that, I think the sense of morale virtually feels very different. And it will feel different and look different. So I think don't limit the idea potentially of what morale can look like or how it can be achieved. To Renee's point, like, there's lots of ways that we can facilitate that. And it's not always just on us to facilitate that either. I think asking our returners to really lean into how can we help bring in our new staff? How can we help you feel connected? That might be some really nice ways to tap those connections.
Absolutely. I think, and Ashley was getting to this too, what's our why? And connecting the learning that is happening every day to why someone wanted to be in the position as an RA is essential. And at the end of the day, our staff, as an accountability measure for their being in virtual trainings, are going to complete a reflection that will connect to what's their why and how does this connect to their future career goals so that they continue to feel more invested in the learning that's happening. Is important. And the other thing I'll just say is we're giving people what they want. They got 2 weeks of training, our professional graduate staff, instead of 4, and it's half days. And so what a win. We've listened to the memes, and I think that framing that will go a long way for morale and will also go a long way for our student staff as well. And knowing that this will reframe and redefine training for the future, because we don't have to go back to the way that it always was.
Absolutely. I certainly want to acknowledge that we're getting near the end of our time today. I certainly want to thank attendees for spending some time with us this afternoon. This is not the end of our discussion of this topic. This is merely the beginning. In a few short weeks, ACUHO-I is hosting our very first virtual summit. So please take a look at that on our website under educational events. We will be incorporating sessions in our virtual summit that are going to be dedicated toward staff training for the fall and what that can look like. So stay tuned for that. If you're interested in contributing to that topic as well, please certainly reach out to me directly. We have a number of virtual roundtables that ACUHO-I is hosting next week. We have a full slate, 7 of them. So please take a look at that. You'll also be receiving from ACUHO-I tomorrow a in-depth document sharing all of our roundtable options for next week, and you can check out links and registration options and description of some of those. Before I go, I definitely wanted to allow time for each panelist to just say a few parting thoughts as we close our time together.
Yeah, thanks, Spence. I'll start. And Paloma's with me too.
Hi, Paloma.
We all have some special helpers nowadays, don't we? If we're all still working from home. I would say that this is a tough time, and everybody's going to do the best they can with the resources that we have. You know, and I think in the end, some of the other panelists said great things about, you know, we need connection now more than ever. There is a sense of connection and bonding that happens when you have to work in crisis. And you know, we have to think about, what do our students need to learn to open our buildings in the fall? What do they need to learn to stay safe? Safe in heart and mind and body. You know, and I think if we can include all of those things in our training approaches, you know, we'll be on the right path. So best of luck to everybody.
A couple thoughts that are on my mind briefly to leave you with is remembering that the components of what makes effective adult learning remain, no matter what the platform is or where you are delivering it. So the things that help people to retain information, the elements that help them to be engaged. And so just keeping those things in mind as you are designing your training remains really critical. And I think that my continued mantra through all this has been, don't let the urgent overtake the important. There's going to be a lot of urgent things that are going to be crossing our desk, and don't let those things distract you from what is really at the core of why your department does what it does. And I think we're all going to feel an intense sense of gratitude if we have students in our halls in the fall, and what that will mean for us. And I hope that that will be a piece that will transform our training in some really remarkable ways for years to come. So thanks for joining us and for your awesome questions. I really enjoyed the opportunity to learn from all of you today.
I guess I would just say, you know, that none of us is in this alone. Clearly, every institution is going to be training their student staff, and so don't be afraid to reach out to, obviously any of us, on this panel, but your colleagues out there. There's a lot of really great sharing that's going on in many different platforms, social media, from Facebook through ACUHO-I and the online community. So please make sure that you're encouraging your staff to check those places out, and then utilize your staff members that are here and that are working, and especially some of those that might have missed out on some opportunities. Think about our graduate assistants who had semesters cut short, and maybe were not able to do internships this summer elsewhere, or even some of our undergraduate student staff who were not able to do internships elsewhere. Utilize those staff members and get them involved so that they start to begin to have a deeper understanding of what we're working in, but getting them connected to our work and to the department, and giving them those higher level views of some of the things and the philosophies behind why we do what we do. That could be really excellent growth opportunities for them. So the biggest thing, just know you're not alone in this, and that we all want to be supportive, and know that we're all having to come up with this together. To try to figure out how we're going to do this and make this, a really great training season for all of our staff. And in the end, we're going to get it done, and everybody's going to put their own little stamp on it. But please feel free to reach out to anyone for assistance or thoughts, and just, how you can look at something a little bit differently than you have previously.
Yeah, and I echo the sentiments that have been shared, and I think when I step back and I think about training and sort of what it looks like and what it entails, I think we all know that by the time we get through August and into September, everyone is really tired, and I think that feeling of tired is completely amplified right now because we're in the middle of a global pandemic. We are in the middle of incredible undue racial bias against Black people in our country. And for folks who are on this call who are also white, I'm going to make a big ask. Please, whatever the format of your DEI training for the fall, please do not ask our colleagues of color to shoulder that work exclusively. If wherever you are in your own work and working to be anti-racist, that work cannot fall only to our colleagues of color. It just can't happen. And I think that we are very much positioned to start to shift that and create space that gives time and energy and healing in a different way to our colleagues so that we can step up and shoulder some of that work.
We can do hard things. If we've made it this far in COVID-19, we can figure out how to operationalize behind closed doors. And don't lose sight of the fact that we need to give people more than just information. They've got to learn some skills along the way. And when you get stuck, don't sit in it. Pick up the Teams call, pick up the Zoom call. When operationalizing this sometimes feels really hard until you're bouncing ideas off with another human, and then you wonder why you were even struggling.
Spencer, you're muted.
Yeah, I know. What a great. I know. It's so hard to get through without forgetting to unmute yourself once. Outstanding comments, and certainly, Kara, that's why we get together to share thoughts and approaches from different campuses. So thank you all for coming together. Attendees, thank you. Panelists, outstanding work with you all. This is recorded. This will be sent out to all attendees. So look for that inbox. Look for that in your inbox soon. Have a great night, everyone.